And thank you. That was terrific. We're now going to move into a conversation. The Secretary General has very kindly, just grab a seat up there, has very kindly agreed to take some questions, and we'll go for probably 25 minutes or so. And we have asked Nick Gowing, who has long been involved with the Brussels Forum, to lead the questioning as soon as we get him completely mic'd up. Okay, Nick, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Craig, and nice to see everyone here again. I'm tempted, Secretary General, just before I open it up to questions, because this is not about an interview, it's about you putting your questions as well. Mr. Martens introduced the metaphor of the bicycle and talked about going uphill and going downhill. You picked it up. Of course, in November, you fell off your bicycle and had a bad accident. And I put that to you not in a facetious way, but simply because out there in the public space is another vision of NATO, which is, and I can quote many, many analyses at the moment, real questions about NATO's future, including from your predecessor, but too, worried about whether NATO can survive in its current formation, particularly with all these pressures. So I have to put it to you, particularly with the 20 reductions in budgets, and also the real limitations which were seen in Libya, even down to planning staffs not being adequate, and American planners having to be flown across to bolster the European capability, that really the fundamental challenges of NATO are really deeper than you've addressed in those more formal remarks.
Actually, you see that I have survived, and very much so. But I can assure you that it takes a lot of training to recover, which leads me to the political conclusion that NATO demonstrated in the Libya operation its strength, demonstrated the principle of solidarity in practice. Yes, you're right. That very successful operation couldn't have been carried out that successfully without a significant input of critical military capabilities from our American ally.
Surveillance, electronic warfare, refueling, planners.
But that's not breaking news. I mean, since NATO was established in 1949, we knew that the reason why we need the alliance is that the Americans are capable of helping the Europeans when it comes to security. But the positive story from the Libya operation is that for the first time in the history of our alliance, European allies and Canada provided the majority of assets for an operation. So that's actually a very, very positive example of how our alliance has transformed and adapted to the new security challenges.
Let me encourage, I can't see everybody out there because it's quite dark, so if there's any chance of any more light, and certainly for the Secretary General, can we get the microphones to people who'd like to come in on any questions? But before the microphone gets to you, let me just press you. Here I've got, for example, a document, a series of pieces from the Centre for European Reform. Does NATO have a future? They threaten to push NATO into irrelevance in the future. And George Robertson, your predecessor, but too, the alliance's credibility may be better served by discussing frankly its current financial and military difficulties and adjusting NATO's ambitions accordingly.
Actually, it's very interesting for me, this doom and gloom debate, taking into account that a number of countries are queuing up to become members, active members of our alliance. I think it's a demonstration of the success of our alliance that a number of countries would very much like to become members of our alliance. I have experienced as Secretary General of NATO that never in the history of NATO has NATO been so busy operating in Afghanistan, in Kosovo, in Libya last year, conducting a counter-terrorism operation in the Mediterranean, a counter-piracy operation along the coast of Somalia. We are as busy as ever.
The trouble is there are a lot of skeptics out there, Secretary General, saying that systemically and in structures, it's still under enormous pressure and it's going to get worse. And I think I'm probably reflecting a lot of the thinking of many of the experts here in the audience.
You will experience, if you do bike, that it makes you even stronger, that you are under pressure, that you have to go uphill. But the fact is that, and the fact is that NATO is as strong as ever, as active as ever, has modernized, has adapted, has transformed. It's really a vivid alliance.
All right, let's get as many questions as possible. Keep them brief. Who's got the microphone first? Congressman Turner, have you got, where are you? Over here. Thank you. You've got the microphone.
Thank you. Turn this on, or does it come on our Mac? Great.
Let's keep our remarks quite short because a large number of people would like to intervene.
Thank you. Secretary General, I really appreciate the fact that you talked about countries that want to join NATO as one of the evidences of NATO's vitality and its importance. One of the issues that we know is that NATO has been the path for emerging democracies to both move toward Europe and toward a relationship with the United States. And it's been an important tool. To use your biking analogy, there are many nations out there who continue to pedal real fast trying to get into NATO. And the concern that many have is that the upcoming Chicago summit has been identified as not an expansion, an enlargement summit. But yet there are many countries that are in the path of still seeking to join NATO. Senator Lugar and I have introduced companion bills in the Senate and the House calling on NATO to make very strong affirmative statements in the Chicago summit, recognizing both the accomplishments and the path that aspiring nations are on that are in the process of joining NATO. Now, many say that joining NATO is a political process, but it ought not be an arbitrary process. What do you foresee coming out of the Chicago summit that these countries can look to, especially countries like Georgia and Macedonia, who are making great strides?
Thank you.
Without anticipating final decisions on how we will organize the Chicago summit, I feel safe to assure you that you will see encouraging language in the communique and the declarations from the summit, encouraging language that will reaffirm that NATO's door remains open. Overall, the whole summit will be a clear demonstration of connectivity and cooperative security, a strong demonstration of our partnerships with countries across the globe, including countries that aspire to become members of NATO. So I don't think you will be disappointed when you see the outcome of the summit. I have to say it will not be an enlargement summit, but you will see events and language that clearly reaffirm that our door remains open.
I like your hand saying, can you hear me? I like your hand signals, Nick.
Identify yourself.
Yeah, of course. I'm Harlan Ullman, Secretary General. It's good to see you again. I'd like to follow up on the May summit in Chicago, if I may. Winston Churchill remarked that he disliked puddings because they lacked a theme. I wonder what themes or theme you think is going to run through Chicago, and what are your expectations of what you hope the summit achieves and what it does not achieve?
Actually, I think the overall theme will be a strengthened transatlantic relationship. Under that headline, we will have specifics. We will adopt a defense package, a package of concrete initiatives that will strengthen our military capability in the future, strengthen the glue that binds our alliance together, including through more multinational cooperation in the acquisition of necessary military capabilities. So that will be one basket of initiatives. Secondly, we will discuss partnerships. in the wake of the Arab Spring, I think we should take the opportunity to enhance our partnerships with countries in the region. There may also be other partnership initiatives. And finally, we will discuss Afghanistan. We will reaffirm our commitment to the Lisbon roadmap as to how we will gradually transfer lead responsibility for the security to the Afghans, and we will reaffirm that we stay committed to our mission in Afghanistan based on the principle in together, out together. So the overall message will be a strengthened transatlantic relationship.
Thank you.
Hello. Okay. Andrew Mikta, GMF. Mr. Secretary, a very brief question. In every crisis that NATO and the allies in Europe have been in together, afterwards we said we need more capabilities, we need more usable capabilities. How do we create this sense of urgency so that a credible argument can be made for the American side of the equation, that the Europeans understand the need to spend more on defense and to become more proactive, so that we do not have at every turn, beginning with the Balkans and ending in Libya, the argument you, sir, articulated here as well, that American role in this was absolutely critical to the mission. How do we get the politicians to muster the political will to speak directly to their public?
In Europe?
In Europe, yes.
Well, again, I would point to the Libya operation as an excellent example. Despite the economic crisis, despite declining defense budgets in almost all European allied countries, the Europeans stepped up to the plate.
Are they committing themselves to that? Definitely, with clarity. Are they committing themselves to that?
To such engagement as we saw in the Libya operation?
Well, and also to replace the assets, to have the assets with which the Americans don't want to provide in future.
I will revert to that. But again, use the Libya operation as an excellent example. Let me, you speak, how will politicians address their publics? Let me use my own country, Denmark, as an example. Denmark decided to participate at the very sharp end of that operation right from the outset, without any caveats, delivering F-16s from the first day, even before NATO took on responsibility for the operation. That decision was based on a very, very, very broad political majority, including political parties that in the past have been very skeptical about any military intervention, not to speak about NATO. But this time they addressed their constituencies in a very proactive manner. They really engaged. They realized that the United Nations Security Council had taken an historic decision based on the principle of responsibility to protect the civilian population in Libya. They used that to make the case convincingly, and they succeeded. And the same goes for other countries as well. Let me use another example. The day before the Swedish Parliament took the decision to join our Libya operation, I met with the Foreign Policy Committee of the Swedish Parliament. And as you know, Sweden is not a NATO ally, but a valued partner. And in the Swedish Parliament, you will also meet some skepticism about NATO. The argument I met why a broad majority in the Swedish Parliament decided to join the operation was that NATO took on the responsibility for that operation, that it took place within a NATO framework, a tested and tried framework with all the institutions necessary to also exercise political control. So I used these examples to demonstrate that it is possible for the politicians to make the case convincingly and get public support for such a decision.
But Secretary General, the issue of procurement and assets.
Now to your question about assets. Again, a concrete example. Yesterday I met with the European Union. The European Union has initiated an air-to-air refueling project, which will address one of the shortfalls we identified during our Libya operation. Overall, we do have an a sufficient air-to-air refueling capacity within NATO, but primarily delivered by the Americans. But the Europeans lack that capacity. This is the reason why the European Union has now decided, through the European Defence Agency, to focus on developing that capacity, and probably, and I will encourage them to do so, that will be a significant European input to our defence package in Chicago. So I take that as a concrete European commitment to delivering critical capabilities in the future.
A concrete commitment, even with 20 member nations having to reduce their defence budgets. Can it be done?
It can be done through more multinational cooperation. It can't be done if we continue business as usual. If we go for purely national solutions, many countries will not be able to afford to acquire these capabilities. But if we pool and share resources, if we help each other across borders and go for multinational solutions, it's possible.
And we won't run out of weapons and ordnance, as we did during Libya, and many of the nations who were actively involved had to go looking for extra weaponry because they'd run out.
Yeah, but actually that's very much about being an alliance,
Okay.
that we help each other.
Right.
Anton LaGuardia of The Economist. I want to pick you up, in a sense, following from Nick's point about procurement and your question of smart defense. I mean, in a sense, it's a new word for an old idea, which is pooling and sharing. This has been knocking about NATO corridors for a long time. It never quite seems to happen. Why is it going to happen now? Secondly, if you really want to make this happen, does NATO need to take on a role similar, for example, to the European Commission, which is to say, okay, allies, this is what you have to cut, this is what you cut, this is what you share, to have some kind of rational organization within NATO. Take the case of Denmark. It's about to go through is it a 10 or 15% cut in defense spending in the coming years? It gave up submarine warfare. You were critical of that, actually, although perhaps today that might be seen as a smart rationalization of one's national resources.
So can I just build on that? I mean, one commentary here, the efficiencies that smart defence stands to generate will be too small to compensate for the cuts in national defence budgets made by European governments since the economic crisis began.
Yeah, let me first correct a misunderstanding. I was not against scrapping the submarines. Actually, it was my government who took that decision, so I was very supportive. And it leads me to a very important point, speaking about smart defense, because you asked me, why is it that we will succeed in more multinational cooperation now? Yeah, well, I have no illusions. It is first and foremost because of declining defense budgets and the economic austerity. But let me point to a very important aspect of this. This goes well beyond economic austerity and declining defense budgets, because the long-term trend is that the cost of advanced military equipment rises more rapidly than inflation and GDP. So investments in the military will occupy an increasing part of our budgets if we don't find new ways to do business. So it's not just because of the economic crisis, it's a long-term challenge. But the economic crisis is the driving force right now, but that's just a demonstration of the fact that you should never miss a good crisis to promote reforms that are necessary anyway. And it is actually my firm belief that we need more and strengthened multinational cooperation. We will never reach the point as the European Union that we have a commission to take initiatives and being the driving force, because when it comes to defense and security, nations will protect their national sovereignty. But actually, we do have within NATO what we call a defense planning process that very much addresses what you asked for, that we try to coordinate how individual allies organize their military so that overall we provide the right mix of military capabilities. But I have to say, and that's a reality in today's world, it is more or less a voluntary process. Nations have not handed over sovereignty to NATO as they have done to the European Commission, and realistically, I don't think they will.
Secretary General, we have about 7 minutes to run, so I want to get many more questions in, if possible. Stephen Erlanger at the back, you've got it. And I'm going to bring the microphone forward here and over here. So go ahead, Stephen. Can you keep it brief? And then we'll pass the microphone forward.
Mr. Secretary General, from the New York Times, just very quickly, Colin Powell used to say, if you break it, you own it. NATO's pretty good at breaking it. It broke it slowly, but it did manage to break it in Libya. But we seem to have left the shards in the desert. Does NATO not have any responsibility for helping Libya to construct a real government that's coherent? Isn't this part of the responsibility to protect? Thank you.
Do you want to answer that now quickly? And move the microphone forward to Michael Ignatieff, please.
Yeah. We had the responsibility to fulfill the UN mandate to protect the civilian population, and we did so successfully. When it comes to the post-conflict phase, I think is primarily a responsibility for the United Nations, helped by international organizations, to assist the new authorities in Libya. We have stated that if requested from the Libyan authorities, we stand ready to help where we have some added value and some expertise within reforming their security and defense sector. So in that respect, we are ready if requested.
Zania Dormandy, Chatham House. Thank you for being here. I'd like to move you into a longer time horizon, in fact, where you started with your remarks. The Libya operation had a NATO umbrella, but as you rightly said, there were members involved in that operation that weren't part of NATO. Afghanistan, again, it's a NATO in some respects operation, but it has lots of members that aren't part of NATO. It seems to me that we're moving towards a structure that maybe has a NATO umbrella, but is more of an ad hoc coalition of members acting. Is that the direction that NATO might go in a concrete way, or is NATO going to continue to conduct such operations in an implicit way? And what are the implications of that in terms of, for example, former Defense Secretary Gates' comments about everybody has to step up and everybody has to do the same thing, because there's clearly a conflict there.
Is that desirable or a matter of fact now?
It's desirable to conduct such security operations in partnership with countries across the globe. It's desirable, it's also necessary. And let me stress, our Afghanistan operation is not a coalition of the willing. The core is NATO command and control. And that's actually why so many partners have joined our operation, that they know that NATO is capable to provide a clear command and control system in which they have confidence. In our council, we can exercise political control and management, and they appreciate that. So that's why such an operation is not similar to a coalition of the willing. A coalition of the willing don't have these fixed structures. So NATO is the core of such operations, but you will see such operations conducted in the future in partnership with countries across the globe. I really do believe that will be the model for future operations, as we saw it in Libya, as we see it right now in Kosovo.
Secretary General, I'm determined to get a voice from Canada and from Russia.
Secretary General, Michael Ignatieff from the University of Toronto. It follows on Stephen Erlanger's question. You're proud of the Libyan operation as a military success. How then do you explain the extent, depth, and ferocity of the buyer's remorse on the Security Council? Because it's making it very difficult to get collective action on Syria.
Yeah. Actually, that's also an interesting paradox, that after the successful Libya operation, we are now in the situation that I can't meet media without getting the question, when will NATO intervene in Syria?
This
And
comes
why
from
not?
a politician and now an academic again.
Yeah, and
not from the media.
No, but it's okay. But I just point to the fact that it's a testament to the success of our alliance that people are now wondering why we don't stand ready to intervene in Syria or wherever. We have no intention to intervene in Syria because it's quite another case than Libya, and it would be too lengthy to elaborate on that. So let me just clearly state that I regret strongly that the international community embodied in the UN Security Council has not managed to reach an agreement that could send a very strong message to the leadership in Damascus. I really believe that the lack of unity in the UN Security Council has sent a very unfortunate message to the leadership in Damascus. So they concluded that they could continue their crackdowns on the civilian population. But we operated in Libya because we had a UN mandate and strong support from countries in the region. None of these conditions are fulfilled when it comes to Syria.
Secretary General, this time last year we had a very spirited debate about exactly that, about laying down those markers very clearly to Damascus in this room. It didn't get very far at that point. Russia.
Secretary General Konstantin Egetz from Kommersant Publishing House in Moscow. President Medvedev today issued a series of threats regarding missile defense, deploying nuclear weapons in Kaliningrad, withdrawing from START treaty. Minister Lavrov told me on Monday that, on the other hand, NATO-Russia, NATO-US relations will never be hostage to the missile defense issue. Who should I believe? And following up on that, isn't the problem is that there is no common threat assessment, and this is essentially a political and psychological question rather than counting warheads and measuring distances. Thank you very much.
And Secretary General, you talked about a commitment to good and stable relations from President-elect Putin. Does that message from Moscow fit in with the kind of message you yourself got from President-elect Putin?
Yeah, if I base myself on facts on the ground, on what is actually happening in the NATO-Russia relationship, it's a fact that our discussions on missile defense haven't made a negative impact on cooperation in a number of other areas. Actually, we have seen steady progress in our cooperation in a number of areas across the board, from Afghanistan, where the Russians have delivered a variable transit arrangement, to counter-terrorism, counter-narcotics, counter-piracy, just to mention some of the practical areas in which we have enhanced our cooperation with Russia. So the fact is, we have disputes when it comes to missile defense, but these disputes have not blocked progress in other areas. Well, just to relate it to our upcoming summit in Chicago, probably and primarily because of a very busy domestic political calendar in Russia, we won't have a NATO-Russia summit meeting in Chicago. But we will have a NATO-Russia foreign ministers meeting next month on the 19th of April We will meet in this very town, and we will discuss progress in our cooperation across the board, and also how we could advance cooperation on missile defense.
Secretary General, thank you very much. I know there's 6 or 7 people who want to come in, but we've got to talk about Iran, and we've overrun our time. So I begged a few more minutes as I was being asked to wind up. So thank you very much, Secretary General. I have to ask you before you go, is there any plan for an alliance bike ride in Chicago?
Not to my knowledge.
No photo opportunity?
No.
Thank you very much indeed, Secretary General.
Thank you.
And thank you, Nick. Secretary General, that was really a terrific conversation.